All right, so today we've got this pretty hefty stack of notes here,
Yeah.
all about consciousness and the self,
Mm-hmm.
and looks like we're going deep on Anil Seth's Being You, a New Science of Consciousness.
Yeah.
And from what I've gathered, you're really fascinated by how our brains create our experience of the world and ourselves.
Absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
You seem to be wrestling with some pretty big questions about what makes you you.
Well, Seth really dives into those big
Yeah.
questions. I mean, he even suggests that this idea of a single persistent self might be an illusion. Kind
Yeah.
of blows your mind.
It does.
But what I found really interesting is how he connects consciousness to the real world.
Uh-huh.
Like he talks about anesthesia, which lets us temporarily switch off consciousness.
Right.
But then he contrasts that with the really troubling disruptions of consciousness that happen with brain injuries or illnesses.
Yeah.
It makes you realize just how crucial it is to understand how consciousness works, not just for philosophical debates, but to actually improve people's lives.
That's a great point. Seth really cleverly links consciousness to these bigger shifts in our worldview,
Yeah.
setting the stage for a pretty radical rethinking of what it means to be a conscious self.
Mm-hmm.
He challenges those deeply ingrained assumptions about our place in the universe
Yeah.
by showing how scientific advances have consistently reshaped our understanding of ourselves.
Right.
Like think about Copernicus, Darwin, and Freud.
Mm-hmm.
Each of them dealt a blow to that idea of human exceptionalism.
Yeah, and to really get a grasp on consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
Seth says we need to understand that subjective quality of our experiences,
Right.
like the redness of red or the feeling of joy or the sharpness of pain.
Yeah.
He uses that famous example from Thomas Nagel.
Oh, yeah.
What is it like to be a bat? To highlight how each creature has this unique perspective.
Yeah. And you know what I find really interesting is how Seth pushes back against those theories that focus only on function and behavior, like the global workspace theory.
Yeah, what's that about?
So that theory suggests that consciousness arises when information is broadcast across different brain regions,
Okay.
which, it might explain how we become aware of certain things,
Yeah.
but it doesn't really capture that subjective feeling of those experiences.
Right.
It's like, imagine trying to explain how a car works without acknowledging the feeling of driving it.
Yeah.
It just doesn't quite capture the whole picture, does it?
So how do we bridge that gap then
Right.
between the physical stuff of the brain and the subjective experience of being?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Seth dives into this hard problem of consciousness, exploring different philosophical stances, like materialism, dualism, even Mysterianism.
Right.
But he seems to lean towards a more pragmatic approach,
Okay.
focusing on what he calls the real problem of consciousness.
Interesting. So what does he mean by that?
Well, instead of getting hung up on how physical matter creates subjective experience,
Wow.
he thinks we should focus on identifying the brain activity that corresponds to different conscious experiences,
Okay.
like finding those neural correlates of consciousness.
I see.
Kind of like figuring out which parts of a radio are responsible for producing sound.
Yeah.
We might not understand how electrons create sound waves,
Right.
but we can at least pinpoint which components are involved.
That's like that analogy.
And I love the example he uses of binocular rivalry.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
When each eye is presented with a different image and your perception flips back and forth between them,
Yeah.
he points out that by studying the brain activity when your perception switches,
Mm-hmm.
even though the input stays the same,
Right.
we can start to pinpoint that neural activity that's crucial for conscious awareness.
Right. And he also brings up those really intriguing cases like people in vegetative states or locked-in syndrome.
Yeah.
Those cases highlight that really important distinction between being awake and being aware.
Okay.
Someone in a vegetative state might be awake but not conscious, while someone with locked-in syndrome might be conscious but unable to move.
Wow.
By studying their brain activity, we can learn more about those neural signatures of conscious experience.
He even goes into the world of psychedelics.
Really?
He and his colleagues used brain imaging to study the effects of LSD and psilocybin, and they found that these substances actually increase measures of conscious level.
That's fascinating.
It challenges that assumption that psychedelics just produce altered states of consciousness.
Yeah,
I might actually be expanding consciousness in some way.
that's pretty mind-blowing. So how do they even measure this conscious level?
Well, Seth talks about integrated information theory.
Yeah.
It's a pretty complex idea.
Yeah.
But basically it suggests that consciousness arises from the way information is integrated across different parts of the brain.
I see.
The more integrated the information, the higher the level of consciousness.
Okay.
And he uses the symbol audio to represent this integrated information.
So a system with high conscious would be highly conscious.
That's the idea.
That makes me think. Could a split brain actually have two separate consciousnesses then?
That's one of the really fascinating implications of integrated information theory.
Wow.
If consciousness is all about integrating information,
Right.
then severing the connections between two parts of a system could potentially create two separate conscious entities.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It also explains why the cerebellum, despite having tons of neurons,
Yeah.
doesn't seem to play a big role in consciousness.
Right.
Its structure might not be as well suited for integrating information.
This whole idea of integrated information really challenges the notion that consciousness is like a temperature
Yeah.
that simply goes up or down.
Mm-hmm.
It suggests that consciousness is more about the structure and organization of information within a system.
Right.
It's not just the amount of activity, but how that activity is interconnected.
Exactly. Even a simple photodiode can respond to light.
Okay.
But it's not conscious because it's just registering information,
Yeah.
not integrating it in a complex way.
That's a good point.
This leads us to Seth's idea of perception as controlled hallucination,
Okay.
which is where things get really interesting.
All right. I'm intrigued.
Basically, he's saying that our brains are constantly generating predictions about the world,
Uh-huh.
and our perceptions are essentially controlled hallucinations based on those predictions.
Hold on. So you're saying I'm not actually seeing the world as it is,
Yeah,
but as my brain predicts it to be?
you got it.
Wow.
Our brains are actively constructing a model of the world,
Okay.
and our perceptions are shaped by that model.
So it's like we're hallucinating all the time,
Kinda, yeah.
but our hallucinations are kept in check by sensory input.
Right.
So even something as basic as color perception
Yeah.
is a kind of controlled hallucination.
Exactly. Our brains are constructing our experience of color based on predictions about how light interacts with surfaces.
That's wild.
Remember that crazy dress illusion that divided the internet?
Oh, yeah.
People saw different colors because their brains were making different assumptions about the lighting conditions. Right.
Another great example is Adelson's checkerboard illusion, where squares appear to be different shades of gray because our brains are taking into account the shadows and surrounding squares.
Okay, I'm starting to see how our brains are playing tricks on us.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
But how does this prediction process actually work?
Well, Seth talks about the Bayesian brain as a way of understanding this.
Okay, the Bayesian brain.
Yeah, think of your brain like a detective,
Right.
trying to solve the mystery of what's causing your sensory experiences.
Mm-hmm.
The Bayesian brain idea suggests that our brains are constantly making best guesses about the world based on probabilities.
Okay.
We have prior beliefs about the world,
Right.
and we use sensory input to update those beliefs and generate new predictions.
So it's like our brains are running this constant statistical analysis
Yeah,
to try to figure out what's going on.
precisely. So it's less about seeing is believing
Yeah.
and more about believing is seeing.
Wow. I like that. Our perceptions are shaped by our beliefs and expectations,
Right.
which are constantly being updated based on our experiences,
Okay.
even when we encounter something totally new,
Mm-hmm.
like seeing a gorilla for the first time.
Yeah.
Our brains still rely on prior knowledge to make sense of it.
It's incredible how much our brains are doing behind the scenes
Right.
to create our reality.
It is amazing.
But Seth takes this idea even further with his beast-machine theory.
Oh, yeah, this is where it gets really interesting.
He argues that our consciousness is deeply rooted in our living bodies. It's not just about having this clever brain.
Right.
It's about being a living organism.
Yeah, being alive is fundamental.
And this is where he introduces interoceptive inference.
Okay.
Can you explain that one for me?
Sure. So interoceptive inference is this idea that our feelings and emotions are actually perceptions of our internal bodily states.
Okay.
It's not just about perceiving the external world.
Mm-hmm.
We're also perceiving the world inside ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a crucial part of what makes us conscious.
Wait, so you're saying my feelings are like controlled hallucinations of my own body?
In a way, yeah,
That's a pretty wild thought.
it is.
So how does staying alive play into all of this?
Well, Seth emphasizes the importance of survival as the primary goal of any organism.
Okay.
He suggests that consciousness is fundamentally tied to this drive.
Mm-hmm.
Our brains evolved to regulate our bodies and keep us alive.
Right.
And consciousness is a key part of that process.
He even brings up cybernetics.
Yeah.
and how machines can have purposes.
He connects the idea of regulation to predictive perception by using the example of a thermostat.
Okay.
A thermostat can make predictions about its environment
Right.
and take action to maintain a desired temperature.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, our brains are constantly monitoring our internal states
Okay.
and making adjustments to keep us within this narrow range of conditions that support life.
So it's all about control and regulation.
That seems to be at the heart of his beast machine theory.
So instead of a ghost in the machine,
Right.
we're more like a beast machine constantly striving to stay alive.
Exactly.
And that drive for survival shapes not only our bodies and brains, but also our conscious experiences.
Absolutely. We perceive the world and ourselves in the way we do because it helps us stay alive.
That's a really interesting way to think about it.
It changes how you think about the relationship between mind, body, and world.
Yeah, it does.
But it also makes you question the idea of a unified, persistent self.
Okay.
Seth dives into those tricky aspects of selfhood by exploring the idea that our sense of self isn't a fixed entity, but a constantly constructed and stabilized perception.
What do you think about that? I'm still trying to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, it's a big one.
He brings up those fascinating cases like somatoparaphrenia,
Right?
where people deny ownership of parts of their own bodies, and the rubber hand illusion, where people can be tricked into feeling like a rubber hand is their own.
It's wild, isn't it?
It definitely challenges that notion of a solid, unchanging self.
Absolutely. And he doesn't stop there.
Oh.
He even discusses that heartbreaking case of Clive Wearing,
Clive
the musician who lost his ability to form new memories.
Oh, wow.
That must be incredibly difficult to live with.
Absolutely.
Without the ability to create a continuous narrative of his life.
Yeah.
Waring's sense of personal identity was completely shattered.
Right.
He was trapped in this endless present,
Wow.
constantly experiencing the world as if for the first time.
It really highlights how our sense of self is built on memory and that ability to connect our experiences over time.
Exactly. But it's not just our individual experiences that shape our sense of self.
Right.
Seth also talks about the social self
Okay.
and the way we perceive ourselves through the eyes of others.
So just like we're making predictions about the physical world,
Yeah.
we're also making predictions about the social world.
Precisely. We're constantly trying to figure out what other people are thinking and feeling. And those predictions shape our own behavior and our sense of self.
So it's like our brains are constantly modeling the mental states of other people.
In a way, yeah.
Are we just social prediction machines then?
You could say that. And those social predictions are just as important as our physical predictions
Okay.
when it comes to shaping our conscious experience and our sense of self.
It makes you realize just how interconnected we all are.
Yeah.
We're not isolated individuals.
Right.
We're social creatures whose minds are constantly interacting and influencing each other.
Absolutely.
And that social dimension is a crucial part of what makes us human.
It makes you wonder about the scope of consciousness beyond humans.
That's a great point.
Where does consciousness begin and end?
Yeah.
What about animals?
Right.
Do they experience the world and themselves in a similar way?
I'm especially curious about what Seth has to say about the differences between human consciousness and the consciousness of other animals.
Yeah.
Could their inner worlds be radically different from our own?
That's a fascinating question. It's fascinating to consider, isn't it?
Yeah.
We tend to think of consciousness as this uniquely human trait. But what if it's something that's shared with other creatures?
Right.
Even if their experiences are totally different from our own.
Right. Like, could my dog be having an existential crisis right now and I wouldn't even know it?
Well, Seth warns us about falling into that trap of anthropomorphism.
Okay.
We can't just project our own human-like experiences onto other animals.
Right.
Or assume that their minds work the same way ours do.
Yeah, that makes sense. We can't assume a dog is experiencing the world the same way we are.
Right.
Just because it wags its tail when it's happy.
Exactly. But at the same time, we shouldn't dismiss the possibility of consciousness in other animals.
Okay.
Simply because they don't have human-like intelligence or language.
Right, like Descartes.
Yeah.
He thought animals were just automatons.
Right.
Completely devoid of any real feelings or experiences.
Like biological robots.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But Seth's beast machine theory
Suggests something different, right? If consciousness is more about being alive than about being intelligent, then wouldn't that mean it could be much more widespread than we usually think?
You're exactly right. He's proposing a kind of biological humility when it comes to consciousness.
Okay.
We shouldn't assume we're the only ones experiencing the world subjectively.
So let's talk specifics.
Okay.
What about monkeys?
Yeah.
They seem pretty close to us, evolutionarily speaking.
Right.
Do they have a sense of self?
Seth believes that monkeys do possess some form of self-awareness
Okay.
based on their behavior and their close evolutionary relationship to us.
Mm-hmm.
He describes visiting Cayo Santiago,
Yeah.
also known as Monkey Island, where he observed rhesus macaques behaving in ways that suggested a rich inner life.
He mentions them having fun and throwing tantrums.
Yeah.
Just like little kids.
It's hard not to see those as signs of genuine emotions and experiences, right?
Yeah. But didn't he also say that monkeys fail the mirror test?
Oh, that's right.
Which is usually seen as evidence of self-awareness.
Yeah, so while their consciousness might be similar to ours in some ways,
Right.
it could also be different in others.
Yeah.
It's like trying to imagine what it would be like to see the world through the eyes of another species.
Okay, now let's talk about one of the most intriguing creatures in the animal kingdom.
Okay.
The octopus.
Oh, yeah.
They seem like they're from another planet.
I know, right?
With those strange bodies and remarkable intelligence.
They're truly amazing creatures. Seth dives into the details of their unique neuroanatomy.
Okay.
Pointing out that they have this distributed nervous system with most of their neurons located in their arms.
Wow.
Rather than in a central brain.
So their minds might be just as distributed as their bodies.
Exactly.
That raises some really interesting questions about how their consciousness works.
Right, like if their arms are essentially semi-autonomous,
Yeah.
does each arm have its own consciousness?
Or is there a single unified consciousness that somehow spans all 8 arms?
It's mind-blowing. And have you seen videos of them camouflaging?
Oh, yeah?
It's like they can just disappear.
Their camouflage abilities are truly remarkable. And it's not just about changing color either.
Yeah.
They can also change their texture and shape to blend in with their surroundings.
That's wild.
It suggests a really sophisticated perceptual system that's capable of making these detailed predictions about the visual appearance of their environment.
And get this, they can taste with their suckers.
It's true.
It makes you realize how different their sensory experiences might be compared to our own.
It really does.
Imagine being able to taste the world with your fingertips.
It's hard to even fathom in it.
Yeah.
It challenges us to think outside the box when it comes to consciousness. It's not just about having a brain like ours.
Oh.
It's about interacting with the world in a way that supports survival and well-being.
Okay, this is where I get a little skeptical.
Okay.
What about insects?
Yeah.
I've never really thought about insects as being conscious. They seem so different from us.
I know it seems almost counterintuitive.
Yeah?
But Seth points out that we shouldn't dismiss the possibility of consciousness in insects,
Okay.
just because they have small brains
Right.
and relatively simple nervous systems.
But don't some insects keep going even after losing a limb?
Yeah.
Does that mean they don't feel pain?
That's a tough question. Their hard exoskeletons might provide some protection from pain,
Okay.
but their brains do contain the neural circuitry associated with pain perception in other animals.
So they might experience pain differently than we do.
It's another reminder not to project our own human experiences onto other creatures.
Right. And there's even research that's found evidence of chronic pain in fruit flies.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about that vast unseen world of subjective experience that might be happening all around us.
Right.
We might be sharing the planet with a much wider array of conscious creatures than we realize.
It's a humbling thought for sure. It makes you think about how we treat other creatures.
Yeah, it does.
But speaking of ethical questions, what about the possibility of artificial consciousness?
Right.
Could machines ever be conscious?
That's the big one. And it's what Seth tackles in the final section of his book.
Okay.
He dives into the debate about artificial intelligence, exploring whether machines could ever truly be conscious.
Right.
And what the implications might be for humanity.
I can't help but think about those sci-fi stories where robots become self-aware.
Oh, yeah?
And they either help or harm humanity.
It's hard not to, isn't it?
Yeah.
But Seth takes a more grounded approach,
Okay.
exploring the scientific and philosophical challenges of creating conscious machines. He seems skeptical that consciousness will just magically emerge
Okay.
once machines become sufficiently intelligent.
So you're saying just because a machine can perform complex tasks or
Right.
pass the Turing test
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean it's conscious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Remember, the Turing test is where a machine tries to convince a human that it's also human.
Right.
Seth points out that intelligence and consciousness aren't the same thing.
Okay.
He even discusses the film Ex Machina,
Yeah.
which puts a really interesting spin on the Turing test.
Uh-huh.
It becomes a test of the human's ability to perceive consciousness in the machine,
Right.
rather than a test of the machine's actual consciousness.
Have you seen that film?
I have.
It's amazing. It really makes you question what it means for something to be conscious.
It's a thought-provoking film, for sure. And Seth highlights how our own perception of consciousness might be the ultimate test,
Okay.
emphasizing the subjective and even emotional aspects of attributing consciousness to others,
Right.
whether they're machines or other living creatures.
It's like those incredibly realistic AI-generated faces that are popping up online.
Oh yeah, the deepfakes?
They're so convincing, even though we know they're not real people.
Those deepfakes are a great example of how technology is blurring the lines between reality and simulation.
Right.
It makes you wonder about the future of our relationship with machines,
Yeah.
especially as they become more sophisticated and integrated into our lives.
And that brings some important ethical concerns.
Absolutely.
Like what?
Well, Seth talks about the potential for job displacement
Right.
as AI systems become more capable.
Mm-hmm.
He also discusses the risks of delegating important decisions to machines
Okay.
and the possibility of AI being used for malicious purposes.
Yeah. So there's a lot to consider.
There really is. It's not just about the technical challenges of creating conscious machines.
Right.
It's also about the social and ethical implications.
Yeah, it makes you realize how important it is to have these conversations now.
Right.
As we enter this new era of AI.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Seth doesn't offer any easy answers.
Yeah.
He's encouraging us to think deeply about what it means to be human
Mm-hmm.
in a world that's increasingly populated by intelligent machines.
He also touches on another ethically challenging area.
Oh.
Brain organoids.
Brain organoids, what are those?
They're essentially miniature, simplified versions of human brains, grown from stem cells in labs.
Wow. So they're not actual brains.
Right.
But they have some of the same structure and functionality.
Exactly. And that raises the question of whether they might be capable of experiencing consciousness.
Right.
Even in a rudimentary form.
It's a possibility we need to take seriously.
Yeah.
As this technology advances.
It seems like he's advocating for a cautious approach when it comes to research in these sensitive areas.
Yeah.
We need to be thoughtful and responsible.
Right.
Especially when we're creating things that might have the capacity for subjective experience.
I agree. Science isn't just about uncovering the secrets of the universe.
Right.
It's also about understanding our place within it and ensuring our actions align with our values.
And that brings us back to the core of Seth's book.
Yeah.
The quest to understand what makes you, you.
It's been an incredible journey so far.
It has. We've covered everything from measuring consciousness to exploring animal minds and the potential for conscious machines.
This deep dive has really opened up new ways of thinking about the self and the world.
It really has. And we haven't even touched on Seth's discussion of the free energy principle.
Oh, right.
Which he sees as this unifying framework for understanding life and mind.
Maybe that's something for you to explore further.
Yeah.
That's a complex idea, but it might just shift your whole perspective on the nature of reality.
But for now, let's move on to Seth's concluding thoughts.
Okay.
And what he believes all of this means for how we understand ourselves and our place in the universe. Okay, so we've explored all these incredible ideas about consciousness, from the neural correlates to the beast machine theory.
It's been a pretty wild ride.
It really has. It's given me a lot to think about.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here?
It's been a truly fascinating journey through the science of consciousness. I mean, we've covered so much.
Right.
From measuring consciousness and exploring those animal minds to even contemplating those possibilities of, conscious machines.
Right.
This deep dive has really opened up some new ways of thinking about ourselves and the world around us.
It really has.
But the journey doesn't end here.
What really struck me is Seth's emphasis on embracing the real problem of consciousness.
Oh, yeah.
It's about focusing on the how, rather than getting stuck on the why. It's a more pragmatic approach, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He is suggesting that we might never fully unravel that ultimate mystery of how subjective experience arises from physical matter.
Right.
But we can still make real progress
Okay.
by studying the brain, the body, and their interactions with the world.
He even describes witnessing a hemispherotomy.
Oh, wow.
A surgical procedure where they remove one half of the brain.
Can you imagine witnessing something like that?
It must have been incredibly intense. Seth talks about how seeing the brain up close in all its messy biological complexity
Yeah.
gave him this newfound appreciation for the material reality of this most magical of objects.
It's a powerful reminder that consciousness isn't some abstract concept floating out there in the ether.
It's grounded in the physical reality of our brains and bodies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And by studying those concrete, measurable aspects of consciousness, we can start to build those explanatory bridges between that subjective world of experience and the objective world of science.
It's like we're piecing together this puzzle, using the tools of science to understand the intricate workings of the mind.
And Seth reminds us that every piece of our conscious experience, every sight, sound, feeling, thought, it's all a form of perception. And as we learned earlier, every perception is basically a controlled hallucination.
Wait, so you mean it's not just the content of our experiences, that's a controlled hallucination? But the actual framework within which those experiences occur...
That's right.
That's pretty mind-bending.
It is a radical concept.
Yeah.
And it might even feel a little unsettling.
Right.
But it opens up all these fascinating new possibilities for understanding consciousness and its connection to reality.
Like what?
Well, think about it. Our experience of free will, the flow of time, even that three-dimensional structure of the world around us, all of it could be shaped by these controlled hallucinations.
Wow. So it's like our brains are creating the stage and the scenery for the play of our conscious experience.
Exactly. So we're not just passive observers of reality. We're active participants, co-creating our own unique experience of the world.
And the most exciting part is that the tools of consciousness science are constantly evolving.
Absolutely.
Allowing us to delve even deeper into the mysteries of the mind and its relationship to the world.
It feels like we're on the verge of this whole new era of understanding when it comes to consciousness.
It's incredible to think about all the discoveries that are yet to be made.
Yeah.
What do you think Seth's work ultimately tells us about what makes us who we are?
I believe it encourages us to see ourselves, our experiences, our emotions, even our sense of self, as this kind of ongoing dynamic interplay between our brains, our bodies, and the world around us. It's not about finding some elusive soul, but about understanding those amazing processes that give rise to our unique experience of being.
It's a beautiful and inspiring message.
It is.
It leaves us with this sense of wonder and curiosity about that vast uncharted territory of consciousness that still lies ahead.
So much more to explore.
What a journey this has been.
It has.
Thank you so much for guiding us through all these fascinating ideas.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, this is just the beginning as we continue to explore the mysteries of consciousness. We may discover that those boundaries between ourselves and the world aren't as clear-cut as we once thought.
That's a good point.
Keep asking those questions, keep exploring, and keep marveling at that amazing phenomenon of consciousness that makes us who we are.